Okay, good morning. Does anyone have any question before we start today? Yes.
Do we have homework today?
We haven't finished chapter 4 yet, so if we finish chapter 4, I will upload the next homework. Okay. Your grade for the extra 10 points that I was supposed to adjust hasn't happened yet. I will do that sometime during the weekend. So I have received some emails from your SI leaders that some of you have requested that I go over the effect of price ceiling and how it creates black market activities and how it results in economic loss. I would like to do that today, and today we would also like to look at the other kind of government policy, which is called a price floor, where the government sets the minimum price on a certain product, and we would look at how this price ceiling and price floor leads to loss of economic efficiency and are undesirable from an economics perspective. So this will be the second time I'll be talking about part of the material. If you feel like after today's discussion you are still having some problem understanding how price floor or price ceiling affects economic efficiency, please come to my office hours and we can talk about them again. Just like the previous class, I will again draw these ideas because I think the best way to understand about their significance is by drawing them. So let's start. Since I am using Microsoft Word, for some reason I cannot really use colored pencils, but I wanted to do that. So we are now first going to look at something called price ceiling. Okay, and we're going to start with a situation. This has a lot of scratch. Oh man. Okay, let me try it one more time. So let's think about the market being where the original market equilibrium is. Let's define an equilibrium, a demand curve and a supply curve. This is supply, this is demand. Imagine that without the market price control, the market equilibrium is at P star and Q star. So without price ceiling, the consumer surplus is going to be A, B, C, and producer surplus, let's define that to be D, and producer surplus is going to be the area B, C, D. So without any kind of price ceiling, the market price is P star, market quantity is Q star, A, B, C, the upper triangle is the consumer surplus, B, C, D, the lower triangle is the producer surplus. Are we all clear with this? Now, the government imposes a price ceiling on this market. And the price ceiling is set below the market equilibrium price at P1. So at P1 price ceiling, we want to understand how the economy is being affected by that. So the discussion that we had in the last class is that government imposes this kind of price ceiling in many markets. One of the markets being the market for rental facilities. So government in rental facilities or in cities impose the maximum rent that landlords can charge to their tenants. And P1 is an example of a price ceiling or rent ceiling in this case, which is set below the market equilibrium price of P star. Let's now try to understand how this price ceiling set below the market equilibrium price will affect our market. To begin with, at this price of P1, we can go to the demand curve and find out that Q1 is the amount of goods that our consumer wants to buy. We can go to the supply curve and find that Q2 is the amount of goods that our producer wants to sell at P1 price. So at P1 price, which is below the market equilibrium, we can see that the amount the consumer wants to buy is less than the amount the producer wants to sell, and this is called a shortage. A shortage, therefore, originates as a result of setting the price ceiling below the market equilibrium. So the shortage is going to be Q1 minus Q2. Do we all see that? Now this shortage is at the heart of the problems that are being caused by this price ceiling. Notice that in this market, as a result of a price ceiling, our producers cannot charge anything over and above P1 legally, right? Because it's illegal to charge a rent above P1. The government mandated that policy. At the same time, our producers know that there are a lot of these people who are walking around looking for an apartment. Do we all see that? So the producer or the landlord will tell the tenant that, look, I cannot ask anything more than P1 legally, but if you pay me something extra, I'm going to give this apartment to you. How much you will pay me will be determined by how much you are willing to pay, which is P2. Based on the demand curve of the consumer, our producers know that our consumer is actually willing to pay P2 rather than P1 to get this Q2 amount of output. So what will happen is that P2 minus P1 is the so-called black market premium that our buyers pay. Now I want to spend a little bit of time understanding what a black market is, because we sometimes do not have the correct appreciation towards what a black market is. Traditionally, we think of black market as a market where illegal goods and services are being traded, like illicit drugs, like human trafficking, and so on. But one needs to understand that from the perspective of economics, any activity which is not approved by the government is considered an illegal activity, and hence it is a black market activity. In your macroeconomics course, we will learn that this underground activity or black market activity or illegal activity could be substantial. For example, you could sell burgers in a street without a government license, and whatever you are selling is part of the black market. Are we all clear on this? So although the goods that are being traded here is legal goods, it's a housing apartment, right? People who are living in those apartment complexes are decent people. Landlords who are selling these rental facilities are not criminals, but this is still black market activity, because this activity is taking place under the table. Legally, our producer can only charge P1, but practically, our consumer pays P2. Do we all see that? So, due to this black market premium, we will see that price ceiling will have undesirable effect on the market. Okay, let's see if I can get some. Okay, very good, very good. I can get some space. So, let's label some of these a little bit more. Let's call, we have already, so now E, F, and then let's call this G, and let's call this H. I think we have covered all of this. So at the new market equilibrium, at the new price ceiling, our consumer surplus, notice that our price ceiling is set at P1, but our consumer actually pays P2. Do we all see that? This is something that we need to really convince ourselves. So if that is the case, the consumer surplus is now AEF, the upper rectangle that is over the price that our consumer pays and below the market demand curve. Okay, so that's our consumer surplus. We can, if you could go down a little bit, and we want to understand producer surplus. Producer surplus is the price that our producer receives, which is P1, and the supply curve. So our producer surplus is literally this. Do we all see that? Because P1 is the price that our producer really gets from the market. Are we all clear on that? We're going to come back to the black market in a minute. Are we all clear on the fact that our producer surplus is, I need to provide one more, I guess, P1, what am I making? H, let's call this guy H. So the producer surplus is DHG, the lower rectangle. Okay? If we compare the consumer surplus before ABC and the consumer surplus after AEF, we would realize that our consumer is losing two parts of his previous consumer surplus. One is the upper rectangle and the other one is the smaller triangle. Do we all see that? Please, let's convince ourselves that these are the two areas that our consumer is losing. I just made a mistake and nobody corrected me. The mistake, and I'm not blaming you guys. The black market premium is actually not P1 minus P2 minus P1, but P2 minus P star. Black market premium is what the consumers pay over and above the market equilibrium price. Okay, this is a minor detail, but it's kind of important. I want to be perfect. Okay, so let's look at these two areas. Let's focus on the first rectangle, the upper rectangle, which was part of consumer surplus before, but our consumer is no longer having that. Why? Because they are paying black market premium. Are we all clear on that? So the upper rectangle is coming from the fact that as a result of this price ceiling set below the market equilibrium price, this results in black market activity where our consumers are forced to pay a higher price, so they lose part of their consumer surplus. Okay? So the upper rectangle is therefore coming from the loss of consumer surplus as a result of black market activity. The one that is difficult to explain is the lower rectangle, which is also a loss. Now this is a loss of producer surplus. Now how come producers lose in this market? This market seems to be a perfect fitting for our producers. So in order to understand the loss of producer surplus, we need to really understand this market. That's why I think the example is so important. The market that we are looking at is actually a realistic market. And I want to tell you a story, because the story sometimes makes more sense than theory. How many of you are familiar with Section 8 housing? Section 8. Anyone familiar with what Section 8 is? Yes. Yes. Section 8 housing is called, it has a more familiar name. I think that's the one you guys are more familiar with. It's called public housing, where government in certain cities, actually in almost all the cities in USA, offer public housing at a lower rent, at a rent lower than the market equilibrium rent. So this is the example that we are looking at. So most of this public housing is offered in larger cities, and surprisingly closer to the downtown, where the traditional rent is substantially high. Right? And you can understand the rationality for providing public housing. Now, in some cities, government also allow you to offer this public housing from private parties. So you could be a landlord who could offer public housing to to tenants who are willing to live on their house, and the government will set you up in that way, right? One of my friends offers this kind of public housing in Fayetteville. So I was talking with him about the kind of rents he charges, and it's a very strange market. Let me give you some example. So first of all, most of the public housing contract is for shorter duration, meaning that you can only have a contract for not more than 2 years. That's a major departure from the way we write contracts with our landlords. Why? Because landlords, when there is a price ceiling like that, really do not want to engage into a longer contract, because they feel that in the future government might change the price ceiling and they might be able to charge a higher price. So why engage into a larger contract with the tenant? We all understand that. Does it make sense? So that's one side of the story. The second side of the story is very strange. So he gave one example which is as follows. Like, let's say you damage part of the apartment that you live in. You and I know that we do this all the time. We hang a picture in the wall and our walls get damaged, and when the landlord comes, the landlord charges you some kind of fee, some kind of fine, right? It's a very common procedure. In Section 8 housing, if you damage the apartment, you get thrown out. You get thrown out. Your contract gets voided and you are back on the street. Strange, right? Question is why? Why do we, first of all, I don't think these rules are even legal, because these people who are really poor probably don't have proper legal representation. Otherwise, they could sue these landlords and get millions of dollars. So you can think of this as part of your career planning. Okay, why? Why do you have a different set of rules and contracts for these kind of market where there is a price ceiling or is a rent ceiling? Anyone? I'm talking about real economics here. We are not making up any stories. We are not saying anything that doesn't exist in reality. Sorry? Why do we see different kind of contractual agreements in Section 8 housing? Yeah.
Because of the intent of the consumer.
Why is that an important issue?
Because they don't have as much buying power.
So in that sense, the contractual agreement should be much more flexible for these poor people. Why is it more stringent?
Because since the consumer has less buying power, that gives the producer, in this case the renter, more power over the contract.
Okay, that argument has two flaws, and both of these flaws are very critical. First of all, the power of the producer really depends on what kind of goods he is selling in the marketplace, which we are going to fully explore in this course. Okay, if you have a market where all the producers are selling the same good, even if there is one consumer, our seller really doesn't have a market power. The second flaw, in this argument is how you are defining the the power of the buyer or the seller. There are two kinds of power that we can talk about, right? One power is how much control you have over the price. In this case, our producers do have more control over the price, you are right. But then the other side is that the control over the price is really not coming from any kind of natural power of the producer. It is coming from the government. Government has created policies that have created this abnormal power given some abnormal power to the producers. That's why we are so critical about this policy. Okay? So going back a couple of steps.
It's because their price is so low that they know that if they kick that renter out, there will be a whole bunch of them wanting to get that apartment.
That's definitely one part of the argument. That's a very, very good argument. So the argument is that since the rent is so low, if you throw out one tenant, you're definitely going to get more, right? Because we have shortage in the market. Do you all see that? That's obviously one part of the argument. The second part of argument, which is what drives this debate about whether there should be Section 8 housing, is that when you charge so low rent, people really have not sufficient incentive to take care of the house. Think about it. We pay according to our marginal willingness to pay, right? Our marginal benefit defines how much we're willing to pay. For a house in downtown, your willingness to pay is actually P2, but you end up paying P1. So you have literally no incentive to take care of your house. Are we all clear on that? It's kind of very interesting argument. I really do not support any of the views that are being expressed, but nevertheless, this is the way we think about it. Okay, so the upper rectangle is the loss of consumer surplus. Now let's start writing them down, and we have to be very careful. This is loss of consumer surplus from black market activity. But you have to understand that this is not a loss from the society, right? This is loss of the consumer surplus from the black market activity, but our producer really appropriates that, right? This becomes part of the producer surplus, which I didn't define. Because the reason why I am not calling the upper rectangle producer surplus is because producers legally don't get that. But illegally they do. Are we all clear on that? Are we all clear on why this is so sensitive and why am I talking about black market twice? So this is actually the loss of consumer surplus as a result of our consumers paying a higher price and our producers getting that surplus. But then there is a lower rectangle, which is loss of producer surplus. Why? Because our producers also incur some of the cost. The cost of writing short contracts, the cost of throwing out tenants whenever they do damage to the house. And these are substantial costs as well. Makes sense? Okay. So, as a result of this black market, everyone hurts. The consumer and the producer. We're going to call the upper rectangle loss of consumer surplus from the black market. We are going to call the lower rectangle loss of producer surplus from black market. But none of them are really loss from the economy's perspective. This is not a loss from the society's perspective, because the society doesn't lose that. It's either the consumer or the producer or some kind of exchange between them takes place that results in this loss. The loss to the society is the underproduction. Notice that in the economy, if there was no surplus, there was no price ceiling, economy would have produced Q star. As a result of the price floor, the economy produces Q2. So there is underproduction. Do we all say that? And as a result of underproduction, the economy loses. The loss of the economy comes from these two rectangles. This is loss of consumer surplus from underproduction. And this is the lower triangle is the loss of producer surplus from underproduction. Together, they form what we call dead weight loss. So the dead weight loss is the larger triangle of B, E, and G. BEG has two rectangles. The upper rectangle is the loss of consumer surplus from underproduction because our producers, our consumers buy less good, and the lower rectangle is the loss of producer surplus from underproduction because our producers sell less. Our buyers buy less, our sellers sell less as a result of underproduction, and both of them are loss from the society's perspective. It is called deadweight loss. I'm going to take 1 minute break and ask you whether you have any question about this. Before I do that, let me just summarize everything. What we just have looked at is a case of price ceiling set below the market equilibrium price. As a result, there is underproduction. and there is black market activities. As a result of black market activities, our producers and consumers both lose. As a result of underproduction, our society loses, which is called deadweight loss. And that concludes the story. Does anyone have any question? Yes.
Are your P1 and your P2, will they offset each other? Or does it?
In what way? In what way?
Well, like, will it put you back at market equilibrium?
It does not.
Okay.
If it did, then we would be in a situation where market is unregulated, just like before. If P1 and P2 were allowed to adjust with each other, they would again come back to P star. And that's the source of the problem. That's a good question. It's a very good question. Okay, the question that is important for your exam is the next one. Okay. I'm going to draw a graph, and we're going to come with a similar situation, P star, Q star, supply, demand. But now my price ceiling is set up at P1, which is above the market equilibrium price. So price ceiling set above market equilibrium, and we want to understand what is the effect. Anyone? What happens to the market if the price ceiling is set above the market equilibrium price at P1?
Nothing.
Who said that? Why?
Because
You're right.
they weren't going to sell that anyway, or they weren't going to ask that price anyway.
Okay. So does anyone else have any other answer? Any other thoughts? I want to connect your idea with the idea he proposed, right? So it is true that below P1, any price can be negotiated between the buyer and the seller, right? Any price, whether it's a price very close to P1, whether it's a price very low to zero, any price can be negotiated between the buyer and the seller. And so the market is basically unregulated below P1. If the market is unregulated below P1, our buyer and seller will interact with each other, and they will always come to the market equilibrium price of P star, and they will all buy and sell Q star quantity. So having a price ceiling set above the market equilibrium price has no effect on the market, because it does not restrict the production. It doesn't create underproduction. It doesn't create overproduction, something that we're going to look at in a minute. So having a price ceiling set above the market equilibrium price has no effect on the market. Any question? I have to utilize this one because I'm recording this. Any question? It has no effect. Okay, now let's quickly move on to the next situation. The next situation is called a price floor. And the textbook has good treatment about price floor, but I want to draw them. Because that's the only way, and probably that's the best way to learn about these kind of ideas. Okay? So our experiment now is about price floor. We are again going to start with the same kind of situations where we're going to start with a market equilibrium of P star and Q star, and I'm going to define A, B, C, D. And at the market equilibrium, so at market equilibrium, our consumer surplus is the area A, B, C. Our producer surplus is the area B, C, D. Okay? Now, imagine the government sets the price floor above the market equilibrium price, let's say at P1. So price floor at P1 is the subject matter of our discussion now. So what happens when the price floor is set at P1? So what is price floor? Price floor is the minimum price that you can charge for a product. It is a government mandated policy. The two prominent example of price floor is agricultural price support and minimum wage law. The one that I want to consider, because that sort of always explains better, is the agricultural food production piece. Because we can make a very simple argument as why the government would like to provide a price support in that market. Government regularly provides price floor support of agricultural production. If that is the case, let's try to understand how an agricultural price support of an agricultural product over and above the market equilibrium price at P1 affects the market. Notice that at this higher price than market price, the amount that our consumer wants to buy is Q1, the amount that our producer wants to sell is Q2. Do we all see that? We have found Q1 by going to our demand curve, and we have found Q2 by going to the supply curve of the market. So at P1, our producer wants to sell more than what our consumer wants to buy, and this creates what we call a surplus. Now, a surplus is a serious problem for a macroeconomy. Why? Because surplus is kind of like the production that is being made but not sold. Right? That's a surplus. Now, in normal circumstance, a surplus is a wastage of economic resources and hence it is inefficient. But we are going to make some compelling argument in this case and argue why this kind of price support makes sense from a government perspective. Before we do that, we're going to start by pointing out that this surplus is not the source of economic inefficiency in this case. So what is there? Let's now sort of provide some new several labels so that we can analyze them. So we have D, then we have E, F, then I think we will need G, H, and I. Okay. So at the price floor, our consumer surplus is the area A, E, F. The upper rectangle, which is the area below the demand curve and above the price our consumer pays. Do we all see that? So our consumer surplus is this. What just happened? So our consumer surplus is basically this rectangle. Right?
So which rectangle?
Area AEF. So A is here, F is here, and E is here. So the upper rectangle is my consumer surplus. Do we all see why this is the consumer surplus now? Because our consumer is now paying a higher price than what he was paying before. Any question? I'm getting a better computer, so we won't be as inefficient in drawing this as we are right now. I apologize. These machines are old. Do we all see the rectangle? So this is the upper rectangle on the top, which is the consumer surplus. Do we all see that? Okay, now let's think about the producer surplus. So what do our producer get? producer surplus is the area below the market price and above their supply curve. So the amount of supply that our producer, at this price, this is the area supply. This is actually the supply that our producer will be able to make, right? Are we all clear on that? Because this is Q1 is the amount that our producer will be able to sell. Let's face it, right? We have too higher price. Our producer will not be able to sell Q2. They will only be able to sell Q1. So the producer surplus is actually this rectangle plus this trapezoid. Isn't that right? Do we all see that? So I'm going to call these areas as E, F, G, whatever, K, G, K, plus, oh man. Anyway, labeling went wrong. So our producer surplus, so it's very important that you at least identify this in your graphs. So the producer surplus is this upper rectangle and this trapezoid. Do we all see that? Let's understand the upper rectangle. Before the price floor, this rectangle was part of the consumer surplus. The consumer had that inside of their ABC, right? Now, as a result of this higher price, our producer gets this rectangle as consumer surplus. So part of the consumer surplus becomes part of the producer surplus now. So our consumer loses, our producer gains. So this is not a loss of the economy. One party gains, other party loses. The loss of the consumer surplus is this upper rectangle which we are going to call loss of consumer surplus as a result of higher price, right? As a result of higher price, our consumer literally buys less than what they were buying before. So they lose this rectangle, and the lower rectangle is going to be called the loss of producer surplus as a result of higher price as well. As a result of this higher price, our producer cannot sell what they were selling before, right? Do we all see that? As a result of higher price, our producer sells less Q1, our buyer also buys less. Both of them pay higher price and get a higher price, but they lose anyway because there is a loss of production, loss of market activities in the economy. So our consumer loses the upper rectangle, our producer loses the lower rectangle. When we add these two up, when we add these two ideas, we are going to call that deadweight loss. So the deadweight loss is the area EIH. I have labeled it too much. I apologize. It is to be B or whatever. I think it was B. Okay. Trying to fix things actually makes it worse. So it's actually EIB. So what am I saying is that the deadweight loss is the larger rectangle. Part of it is loss of consumer surplus, part of it is loss of producer surplus. So the question is now, so by the way, so what we see that as a result of a price floor, we also can have deadweight loss from the economics perspective. So the economy loses. Why does the economy loses? Because our consumer pays a higher price, buys less. Our producer gets a higher price but sells less. Now, the critical question that I now want to talk about is as a result of this price floor, there is clearly a surplus in production. The economy produces more than it can sell. Can it tell us something about economic efficiency? In general circumstance, whenever there is a surplus production, whenever the economy produces more than what the economy is buying, it is a clear indication of economic loss. But in this case, it is not a loss of economic efficiency. Surplus is not the source of economic loss in this case. The reason why the economy has deadweight loss is because of the higher price. Are we all clear on that? So why are we not calling surplus production a loss? Why are we not? The answer is very simple. In almost all the countries in the world, the government provides a complementary policy to this price floor policy, which is called a subsidy, where government literally buys back the surplus production made by producers. So the government promises that I'm going to put a price floor, and if you are unable to sell your production, I'm going to buy that from you. Are we all clear on that? It is called agricultural price support. It's a combination of two policies. One is a price floor, and the other one is a buyback guarantee. So the question is why? Why does the government provide this kind of generous policy towards the agricultural producers?
To stabilize the price of food.
Explain.
Because there'd be events that would shift the price quite often, and so this gives an area of which the price will be.
That's a very good answer. I'm going to come back to your answer in 1 minute. Can anyone else provide some kind of argument as to why government provides this kind of combo policy to the producers? What does the government gain by providing this kind of agricultural price support policy? Now, the discussion that we're having right now is a very, very controversial policy. Yes?
I mean, especially with agriculture stuff, that means they're always going to have a surplus of food, which is better than having a shortage.
Absolutely right. And the argument that you just made has got nothing to do with positive economics. It has got nothing to do with these welfare analysis, because policies are not done by people who really care about deadweight loss. They don't draw this. What they care about are things like food security, something that is central to almost any economy in the world. I used to teach at a country where agricultural production was minimal. It was at its minimal. The country could really not produce anything. Still, the government provided very generous agricultural price support policies so that agricultural production is maintained. So sometimes it is argued that agriculture is part of the tradition of a country, which is very unique argument. But most of all, government regularly supports this food security issue, where it is believed that every country should have some kind of viable option when it comes to food, because you really cannot depend on international market for your food. You need to be able to produce some of your own food. Yes?
When the government buys it, are they actually buying it?
Yeah, they literally buy that, and I'm going to come back to why they do that in a minute.
What do they do with it?
Okay, so that's the second part of the question, which is going to be relevant for the point that he mentioned. So are we all clear on the fact that the reason why the government provides this kind of price support policy has got nothing to do with economics? It has got everything to do with policy and politics and whatever, right? And they're very important. Okay, so the next question is, what do the government do with this food? First of all, government literally buy this food from the surplus food from the market, store it in a place, and with the belief that this could be used as a way to stabilize the market price. That's a very good answer. I'm surprised with that. Government really does not care about price stabilization. What they care about, I think, and I've talked about this with many of my colleagues. My advisor is to be the finance minister of my country. My country is an agricultural-based country, so these kind of food security issues are very, very hot and very relevant. So government really cares about whether there is a shortage or surplus in the market. So government buys surplus from one period so that that can be channeled into the market so that another period's shortage could be adjusted. Are we all clear on that? So we think about government role, we should think about government role from a production or supply side rather than from the price side, but it does that anyway. When the government balances out the shortages and surpluses because production is subject to weather variations, it could be there could be surplus in one year, there could be shortage in another year, right? If the government doesn't buy the surplus food, how is the government going to tackle the shortage in another year? Do we all see the reason? Okay, so the government does that very, very regularly, and we have provided, so the surplus food that we're looking at the top of our graph really doesn't explain why we have economic inefficiency, because if the government really stabilizes between shortage and surpluses, this is actually a very good policy to ensure market stabilization, right? So the main source of economic inefficiency is coming from these two triangles. The triangles that indicate the sum of producer surplus loss and the consumer surplus loss as a result of the high price that people are paying in this market. So let us summarize. We just looked at an example of government price floor where the price floor is set above the market equilibrium price and have caused our consumers to pay a higher price, have caused our producers to sell less. As a result, there is surplus in the market, and also there is loss of economic efficiency indicated by the deadweight loss. So the price floor set above the market equilibrium price is economically inefficient as the price ceiling set below the market equilibrium price. That takes me to the next question, which is going to be in your exam. We're going to draw the graph again. And if we have the market equilibrium at P star and Q star, supply and demand, rather than set the market price floor at a price higher than market equilibrium price, what if we have it at P1? So at price floor P1, what happens? Let's say the price floor is now set at P1, which is less than market equilibrium price. What is the effect of this price floor? Yes?
Again, there is no effect.
Why?
Because it doesn't change market equilibrium.
It does not. It does not create any kind of shortage or surpluses in the market. It doesn't have any interference over how the market mechanism works. Do we all see that? So, when the market price floor is set below the market equilibrium price, it has no effect. Let me move directly back to where this argument is very, very relevant. By moving back to our colored world again. Okay? So what we just did is we looked at two different situations where this was an example of a price ceiling, when if the price ceiling is set below the market equilibrium price, we are going to have this deadweight loss of this shaded area. Then we go back and we come back to the market where price floor is the most common. This is not the one that I want this one. Okay, so what we just did was we looked at the price floor argument where the market equilibrium price is $3, the price floor is $3.50, and what it did, it created a deadweight loss equal to the sum of these two rectangles. So B plus C is the deadweight loss. And we also argued that whenever there is a price floor, there is an excess supply, or there is a surplus in the production, which is 2.2 minus 1.8. Do we all see that? This is the surplus output in the economy. The place where this becomes a critical issue is the market, labor market. So let us try to understand what is happening here. The market equilibrium wage is W star, but the minimum wage is set above the market equilibrium. So you can see clearly that if that happens, there is more supply of labor than demand, because L2 is how much labor you and I supply, and L1 is how much, L3 is how much labor firms want to hire, right? So if there are more supply of labor than firms want to hire, this is called a surplus of labor in the market. Now, just last word, the reason why surplus of labor is so important, because if you have worker going to the market with no job, we call it unemployment, and this is a very, very serious issue. And we are in the next class, we're going to look at that.